After months of silence and speculation, Kyrsten Sinema, the controversial independent senator from Arizona, has officially announced that she will not be seeking re-election in 2024, which has major implications for the United States Senate. But even I, a cynic, am cautiously optimistic. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends. Yeah, this is a big deal. And again, I'm cautiously optimistic. I say that as a cynic, but there is a solid basis for the good news here. Now, I do want to play a bit of Kyrsten Sinema's announcement video. We're going to play about a minute of it, maybe 90 seconds, and then we'll unpack it together.
In 2017, I warned we were approaching a crossroads. Our democracy was weakened by government dysfunction and the constant pull to the extremes by both political parties. I promised I would do my best to fix it, to protect and defend our Constitution, to listen to others without judging, to focus on what unites us, and to make Americans' lives better. Through listening, understanding, and compromise, we delivered tangible results that make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. Yet, despite modernizing our infrastructure, ensuring clean water, delivering good jobs and safer communities, Americans still choose to retreat farther to their partisan corners. These solutions are considered failures, either because they're too much or not nearly enough. It's all or nothing. The outcome, less important than beating the other guy. The only political victories that matter these days are symbolic, attacking your opponents on cable news or social media. Compromise is a dirty word. We've arrived at that crossroad, and we chose anger and division. I believe in my approach, but it's not what America wants right now. I love Arizona, and I am so proud of what we've delivered. Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of this year.
And she goes on like that for another 90 seconds. A lot of it is self-congratulatory. And again, I've got some feelings about this, but before we dive into Kyrsten Sinema's record and before we dive into why I'm cautiously optimistic about her absence in the Senate, I do want to play an interesting contrast with a member of the Republican Party, Ken Buck, who is in the House of Representatives. He represents a district in Colorado, so he's effectively neighbors with Kyrsten Sinema. But I want you to hear how he justifies his departure from the House of Representatives and the Republican Party.
There are a lot of things that went into the decision, but really we're at a time in American politics that I am not going to lie on behalf of my presidential candidate, on behalf of my party. And I'm very sad that others in my party have taken the position that as long as we get the White House, it doesn't really matter what we say.
So I've talked about Ken Buck before, and the reason I'm bringing him up here is, again, to note the contrast. So Kyrsten Sinema does the enlightened centrist shtick. She's like, both sides are just retreating to the extremes, and both sides and both sides. But Ken Buck, who is a far-right Republican, a member of the Freedom Caucus, this guy has some deranged views on climate change, abortion, you name it. He was a big Trump supporter. What I find interesting is he at least has enough integrity to say the reason that he's leaving isn't because of both sides. It's because the Republican Party is extreme. And Kyrsten Sinema, who used to be a Democrat until she formally changed to become independent like a year and a half ago, she also knows that the extremism really is the Republican Party, not the Democratic Party. But she can't help but say, yeah, both sides. So anyway, I found it fascinating that Ken Buck managed to find more honesty and more sincerity and more accountability than Kyrsten Sinema. So that said, though, I do want to remind everybody, Kyrsten Sinema, even after she became an independent senator, right? She changed her party. She continued to caucus with the Democrats and President Biden. She helped Biden substantially. I mean, 94% of the time she voted with President Biden's position on legislation. That ain't nothing. That is a decisive, overwhelming, stupid majority. So I want to be very clear about this. Kyrsten Sinema, for the most part, was an ally in the Senate, and it's infinitely better to have her there than a Republican. I want to be very clear because I know a lot of people, and I myself am frustrated with Kyrsten Sinema, and we'll get into some specific examples, but a lot of people, again, go too far like they do with Joe Manchin. Well, we might as well have a Republican in that seat. No, absolutely not. Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are objectively better for the Democratic Party and the rest of the country than any Republican occupying their seats. I just want that on the record. But Kyrsten Sinema, when she did deviate from the Democratic Party, it was on high-profile issues, and she did it in a genuinely annoying way. You all may remember when she voted against $15 minimum wage, and she did the mocking curtsy at the time, which many progressives were infuriated by, myself included, because it wasn't just that you voted against this, you voted for it in such a vicious, condescending way, in a way that hurt people, okay? She also refused to make any sort of carve out for the filibuster on federal voting rights, on federal abortion rights, on a whole host of issues, even though she voted in favor of that legislation. She understands the vital importance of maximizing voting rights in this country and doing it at a federal level. She voted for all that, but she was unwilling to break the filibuster for those key specific issues to do it. That's also incredibly frustrating. So again, it's not that she deviated all the time. She hardly ever did. But when she did it in the most annoying ways on major substantive issues, which have contributed immensely to the harm in this country. So why am I optimistic, right? Especially if you say, Josiah, well, if she voted with Biden 94% of the time, that ain't nothing. Why are you optimistic? Because that person, she loses her incumbency advantage, right? If she's no longer running for office. Well, the reason I am confident, or at least cautiously optimistic, is because we have a pretty strong candidate, former Congressman, Democrat Ruben Gallego, who is running effectively to replace her. He was already running as the Democratic candidate. Kari Lake, the deranged MAGA cultist, is running on the Republican ticket. And the only question was whether it was going to be a three-way race between incumbent Sinema as an independent, Democrat Gallego, and Republican Kari Lake. Now it's a 1v1. And again, we'll get into why I'm cautiously optimistic. But Ruben Gallego says, in response to Sinema's decision, I want to thank her for her nearly 2 decades of service to our state. Arizona, we're at a crossroads, protecting abortion access, tackling housing affordability, securing our water supply, defending our democracy. All of this and more is on the line. It's time Democrats, independents, and Republicans come together to reject Kari Lake and her dangerous positions. And if you look at polling, Ruben Gallego is doing extremely well. He was actually doing pretty well even when the notion was a three-way race. Noble Predictive, which is a nonpartisan polling agency or polling group, they found that in that three-way race, Sinema was so unpopular and she generally pulled votes from Republicans that it advantaged Gallego. But the same thing occurs with Sinema out of the race. That polling finds that Gallego is favored to beat Kari Lake in a two-way race. That's good news. Now, of course, as I say all the time, polling is a snapshot in time. It's entirely possible with Kari Lake's name recognition. She's very charismatic, even though I think she's incredibly deranged. She has Trump's endorsement, which means she'll have the MAGA base backing her. It's possible that that may change, but I hope it doesn't. And the polling indicates that right now he is favored to win. He's also beating her, Kari Lake, that is, on fundraising. So this was reported back in January. Gallego raises $3.3 million in the fourth quarter, exceeding Kari Lake. I think she pulled in like $2 million. Gallego's fundraising haul exceeds $2.1 million. That former TV news anchor and Senate Republican candidate Kari Lake raised between mid-October and the end of December. Again, I think he also announced, raised more than $13 million since announcing his Senate bid in January 2023, and he heads into the election year with $6.5 million in cash on hand, to say nothing of the fact that Democrats have a very robust war chest between President Biden's fundraising and the Democratic Party's fundraising. They are whomping Republicans brutally, vastly out fundraising them in quarter after quarter after quarter after quarter. So Gallego will have support, hopefully robust support from the Democratic Party, especially because the DNC knows this Senate map for 2024, folks, it's brutal. Okay. You got to remember, we have a razor thin Senate majority, thanks in large part to Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin is still a Democrat, but he is also not seeking re-election in West Virginia. And unlike Arizona, West Virginia is not competitive for the Democratic Party. We stand no chance whatsoever. We will not hold that seat. It's gone, which means our margin for error is even smaller. As Axios reported late last year, the Senate 2024 map is historically favorable for Republicans. They're aggressively contesting at least 8 Democratic-held seats, with Democrats hoping in a best-case scenario of replacing Senator Ted Cruz of Texas with Colin Allred, right? And Ted Cruz, as wildly uncharismatic and disliked as he is, he beat Beto O'Rourke last time, despite enormous fundraising and Beto's charisma and things like that. So it's not set in stone, okay? Even though Allred, he's very charismatic. He's a former football player. He embodies a lot of the Texas values that Texas say that they value, except with a liberal tint to it. So hopefully that will go well. But that's our best case scenario, right? So we can't afford to lose anybody. We can't afford to lose John Tester in Montana. We can't afford to lose Sherrod Brown in Ohio. And if we're going to lose Kyrsten Sinema, that's great because, again, when she deviated, the few times she deviated from the president's agenda, it was on high-profile major issues. So I'd be happy to be rid of her. But we need to get a Democrat in there. And Ruben Gallego is the best chance. I'll also remind you, given the recent Supreme Court rulings that we've discussed and upcoming Supreme Court rulings like on mifepristone, an abortifacient, an abortion over the pill or over the counter pill, right, which is coming up in the next few weeks. It's important that we certainly don't lose any ground on the Supreme Court and hopefully expand. And I'll remind you, it's the Senate that confirms the president's Supreme Court nominees. So just put this in perspective. Even if Joe Biden wins re-election, it's vital that we keep the Senate because it's entirely possible that one of the justices will retire or die in the next 4 years. It's entirely possible. And what we don't want is for Republicans to control the White House and the Senate, but we don't even want them to just control the Senate because there's no way, there's no way that this bad faith Republican Party will ever confirm a judicial nominee from Joe Biden. They pretty much signaled it time and time again. So Democrats have to win the White House. They have to keep the Senate. They have to win back the House. And Ruben Gallego in Arizona will give us an opportunity to do so, even though Kyrsten Sinema is retiring. Okay. Let me know what you think in the comments.